Hello guys, this will be an unusual video. So this week I'm heading to Cyprus with family for a week, and always on this channel I've been shooting videos a bit ahead, like 7 videos ahead or something. Every time I went on vacation, I've been shooting videos up front, scheduling them. But this time I decided to go to a proper vacation. This channel has been daily for, I don't know, a few years at least, or even more, so for a week or so I will be totally off with the family. I feel like I became too stressful trying to keep up with daily videos as well as laraveldaily.com, which became kind of the first activity for me, and I feel my energy level is low enough, so I need to have totally free week, a week off creating video content. I will still be somewhat online, still will be answering some questions and tweets, but off the hamster wheel of putting out video each day. But I will leave you with something. So for a week or so, maybe a bit more, I'm coming back on 22nd of May, and probably a few days to recover, so on something like 24th or 25th May, I will get back with daily videos daily again, and I have a few really good surprises here for you in June, so stay tuned for that. But I will leave you with two things. First, why I'm showing this Laravel Daily.com here, I recently launched a new page, so in resources, project ideas. I'm gathering projects, real projects from Upwork, so you could even pitch them to win those jobs. But the goal is different, to have you build the examples to your portfolio. It doesn't necessarily have to be for a client. For example, activity tracking, rebuild Laravel backend. So this is the description of a real project that you could imagine that you could build. Then you put it on your GitHub. It could be part of the project, it could be some section or something like that. So you can just browse around, and in your spare time, while I'm away, you can try to build something, and then you can send your repository to me, and I may have the time to review it again after I come back from vacation. Or just generally, you can put that on GitHub and show it in public on Twitter or elsewhere. So I will link that in the description below, project ideas. You can just browse around, and by the time this video airs, maybe there will be more than 7 project ideas here. And then the second thing, I will show you part of my webinar. So last week I started doing webinars for premium members of Laravel Daily, and the first one was about structuring projects, so I will show you the first like 10 minutes of that. And if you want to participate in webinars and have the video of that webinar in full, the link will be in the description below. So resources, webinars is the page where I will announce future webinars and have download video links for premium members again. So yeah, those two things I will leave you with. So in the next 10 minutes, you will have the first 10 minutes of this webinar about how to structure Laravel projects. And I'm heading off to Cyprus for a week, and see you guys in other videos. A few disclaimers. I specifically called it overview of options because in 30 minutes, it's impossible to actually talk about everything around structuring the projects. I will just give one example, and one example with all the possible options. If I want to be shorter, the short answer to how to structure Laravel, any Laravel project, is however you want. So that's the blessing and the curse of Laravel, that you can structure controllers and models and services and repositories and actions however you want, and that would still mostly work if your code is okay. And there's nothing stopping you from using one or another design pattern. So it's ultimately the decision for yourself, similarly to what use like Livewire, Inertia, or Vue, whatever. This is a decision of yourself and your team. But of course, the presentation doesn't really end here. So let's start from the very beginning. So what is Laravel? Laravel in its core, in its typical thing, is model, view, and controller. And I recently shot a video on YouTube. So what changed since Laravel 5 to Laravel 10? And in this slide, basically, this is the core of Laravel. It was the same in Laravel 4, and in Laravel 10, it's the same MVC, just grown with more features over time. So this is the core, how to structure the project in its essence. But then the problem becomes when we have more logic and when that logic grows. So we have either fat controllers with a lot of logic. So for example, you need to store some data, and that store involves a lot of manipulation of the logic, checking something, so you become with fat controller. And or it could be a lot of additional logic in the model. So in addition to relationships, you could potentially store some methods in the model. So if we just cover the same MVC and don't go elsewhere, then one of those layers become fatter or bigger, whatever is the word you prefer. And this may be a problem. Not necessarily, because it may be just fine if your project is fine with that. So if your project doesn't grow with new features, if the project is relatively small, if the team is only yourself or only a few devs who understand that code perfectly, you may be okay with that fat controller and model because, well, why complicate things if you don't have to? I'm a big fan of not overcomplicating and not over-engineering and not prematurely optimizing things. So if you feel that your project is small enough that this architecture is okay for you, you don't need to introduce any like services or any other layers. But the problems happen when the project grows. So it's kind of fine until it's not fine anymore. So when you have to search for projects, actually, I will hide the faces. So yeah, when you need to search for something in controller or the model, when your controller becomes like 2000 lines of code, of course, that's extreme example, like even 500 lines is already an extreme example. But if you need to search for something and wonder where things are, then it's one red sign. Another red sign is if you hire more people and they are confused with that controller model or whatever your structure is. So to hire new developers and to introduce new features and to maintain the application, to fix the bugs, and for all of those cases, that simple MVC may be a problem. So then what do we do? So that's the problem. MVC, the controllers and models should be thinner, and then we have fat business logic. And where do we put that? And this is where Laravel is famous for. It's like blessing and a curse that you can put it anywhere you want, basically in any PHP class, and you can call it whatever. Like in very short and very like pragmatic form, you just call class a service and you move on with that. That's one of the options. So let's run through those options one by one. So the example that I will be talking about is a long controller method. This kind of it's a real example, but it's shortened and it's a bit artificial. But imagine the controller that needs to save some data or update some data, and it has a lot of parts. So validation, data creation, data transformation, email sending, returning the response, and stuff like that. So you could even visually set apart the parts. So to fit it on one screen in the slideshow, I shortened it. In reality, that method may be 100 lines of code. So in essence, Laravel is great that you could put it piece by piece, and every piece should be moved elsewhere to a dedicated class or dedicated, I don't know, class or what's the other word, namespace, powered by Laravel. And in this presentation, I will discuss all those options. So each part can be moved to its own dedicated space, I called it. So the first part is actually not the first part. This is the end result, the slide that, so we want to move from here, from this like 50 or 100 lines of code to just a few lines of code in the controller. So our goal is to shorten the controller, and then all the logic will be elsewhere. And that elsewhere may be one of those options. So step by step, move all this code to where? Again, answer is wherever you want. Coffee? I need to fill in my throat with this so my voice wouldn't die down from time to time. So yeah, again, wherever you want. But of course, let's stop trolling and let's go step by step. So checks should be probably to form request. I'm a big fan of form requests. I'm a big fan of not putting the validation in the controller because that's kind of polluting already. So you expect the controllers to perform some action and you're kind of stopped with validation. Like, hold on, let's not do what we're supposed to do. Let's check this and that. So that check could be totally moved to form requests. So in the controller, you could have only form request. And not many people use both actually, but in form requests, you can have both validation for rules and also authorize check. So I don't see enough people using that authorize method. Instead, they're using middlewares, they're using checks in the controller, wherever. But authorize method was created for that specific reason, to check the permissions, to check the auth user is admin. You can use gates, you can use policies, but authorize in form request is a perfectly valid thing instead of doing that in the controller. So the first space where to move the validation from the controller would be in my opinion, form request. And by the way, I will repeat, this is my opinion. This whole presentation is my philosophy over the years where I would move potentially all the different parts of the controller. But of course, there are many more other options and other philosophies. You can argue with me a lot, and we will probably when I stop speaking. So just kind of a disclaimer, this is my way, but this is totally not the only way. And whenever someone asks me like, what is the best practice to do this and that? In many cases, there's no best practice. It's whatever you want. So this is the presentation of what I would do more than best practice. So again, notice this can be done also with policies or middleware. It can, but I'm quite a big fan, especially recently, to offload the validation of permissions to authorize and gates. The next step is transforming the data to mutators or observers. Again, both can work. It's your personal preference. So for example, you want to, before saving the data, you want to mutate, like change date format. This is a classic example of one line, but with all those examples, imagine in your case, example could be much more complicated, transforming something into something, and like it could be much more complicated. I simplified those examples just to fit them in the slide. So this is the example with transforming hashing password and then transforming the format. One of the ways is to have mutators in Eloquent model. So model would be kind of responsible for its own fields and its own logic. So this is kind of a way to offload that from controller. Or another way, which is also kind of related to model. So it could be in the model or additionally into observer, which would be attached to model. So model would be thinner, it would stay thinner. And then in the observer, you would do the same operation on creating. Observers, actually, if you do artisan make observer, they are generated with created model method, which is executed after the data is saved, but there's also creating, where you can override any fields before they are saved in a database. So another space to offload from the controllers could be Eloquent model with the model or observer separately. Also, you can, in here, you can add global helpers. Global helpers are not talked that much in Laravel because they are not really a Laravel thing. It's just a Laravel class or Laravel set of functions, but not Laravel, I mean PHP. But I'm not a fan. I'm really not a fan of doing like WordPress. So WordPress has functions, PHP for everything. So I advise you not do that, even if you have like helpers which don't really belong to anywhere, which they're global. So for example, convert a database to something, still create a class and then use that class in wherever in Observer, for example. So global helpers could be kind of like additional layer on top of Eloquent model in this case. Then step 3, where to save the data. So instead of doing user create, instead of doing this in the controller, you could offload that to somewhere. So then in your controller, you have service create, request validated comes from the form request. So you don't need to pass anything here additionally. And ironically, if you take a look at service example and action example, I'm switching the slides now. So left and right, left and right. Do you see much difference? There's not much difference, to be honest. So services are actions, and the difference between those is almost philosophical. So service is a class that is about, usually typically about some Eloquent model, like user service, like transaction service, like project service, post service, blog service, something like that, usually around Eloquent model. It could be a bit more like service for, you know, transforming the money, something like that. But the most typical example is around Eloquent model. Basically, all the CRUD could be in the service. What I'm saying is multiple methods are in services. So that is the fundamental difference between services and actions. Actions became more popular in Laravel in recent years. So in app actions, you may create user action, and this is fundamental difference. Action is just for one action, for one method, which is typically called execute or handle, or what's the other, invoke. It could be so one method or process, and then you call that method in your controller here. So execute, action, execute. But in both cases, from the controller point of view, it's the same, almost the same logic. So you initialize the service or the action as a parameter of controller method, or you can initialize that in the constructor for all the controller. So Laravel allows us to type hint the class and then auto resolve, auto create that object. So we don't need to manually do user service, new user service. So Laravel does that for us, and then we use that in the controller method. So services or actions, I guess it's a very personal preference. And getting back to my earlier points, both of those, service and action, is just a PHP class. It's not even a Laravel class. There's no PHP artisan make service or make action. There are packages for that, but basically class user service, it's just a PHP class. It doesn't have any traits inside or any Laravel logic. It's just a PHP class. So you pass the array of user data that comes from Laravel controller, and you return a PHP object or eloquent model, something like that. Then separately, let's mention, again, this is my philosophy and my personal opinion, because with repositories, there are so many people with different opinions that I need to have a disclaimer that it's my personal opinion about repositories.